India and the United States, once seen primarily as defenders of democratic values and global cooperation, have undergone a dramatic transformation in their military doctrines and strategic reach. In the evolving geopolitical landscape, their rise as assertive military powers has created unease across the globe. Their growing capabilities, increasingly interventionist policies, and strategic partnerships are contributing to a perception that they are no longer just protectors of stability, but also potential sources of global insecurity. The fear stems not only from their sheer power, but from the way this power is being projected beyond borders, often with minimal accountability and with a clear willingness to challenge traditional norms of military restraint. The United States has long been the world's foremost military power, but its strategy in the 21st century has shifted from large-scale invasions to strategic overreach through cyber warfare, drone strikes, special operations, and proxy alliances. The presence of U.S. military bases in over 70 countries, along with its control over key maritime routes and airspace, gives it unparalleled reach. Recent years have seen a renewed focus on the Indo-Pacific region, where the U.S. has significantly increased its naval deployments, military exercises, and strategic pacts to counter China's growing influence. This militarization of contested spaces like the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait contributes to a tense security environment where any miscalculation could lead to open conflict. Simultaneously, the U.S. has invested heavily in advanced weaponry, including hypersonic missiles, autonomous drones, cyber weapons, and artificial intelligence-enabled systems. Its military industrial complex continues to expand with massive defense budget. It's justified by a doctrine of preparedness against near-peer adversaries. While these developments are often framed as defensive, they are seen by many nations as aggressive posturing, signaling that the U.S. remains willing to use overwhelming force to maintain its global dominance. Smaller states worry about being caught in the crossfire of great power competition, while adversaries view American activities as provocations, leading to further arms buildups and regional instability. India, though historically non-aligned and strategically cautious, has increasingly adopted a more assertive military stance in line with its growing global ambitions. With one of the largest standing armies in the world and a rapidly expanding defense budget, India has moved beyond a defensive posture to become an active player in regional power politics. In recent years, it has conducted cross-border strikes, engaged in high-altitude clashes with China, and enhanced its naval operations in the Indian Ocean and beyond. India is no longer content with being a regional power. It is aiming to establish itself as a security provider across Asia and the global South. To support this vision, India has ramped up military modernization efforts. It is investing in fifth-generation fighter jets, long-range missile systems, nuclear submarines, and sophisticated cyber capabilities. In parallel, India has pursued strategic defense partnerships with countries like the U.S., Israel, France, and Australia. These partnerships have led to joint military exercises, intelligence sharing, and technology transfers, significantly boosting India's capabilities. For instance, the annual Malabar naval exercises, which include the U.S., Japan, and Australia, serve not just as drills, but as clear demonstrations of military alignment against shared adversaries. This expanding reach is also visible in India's engagement in the Indian Ocean, where it seeks to counter China's Belt and Road military footprint. India has established military outposts in countries like the Seychelles and Mauritius, increased its cooperation with island nations, and regularly patrols key choke points such as the Strait of Malacca. While these moves are often presented as measures for regional stability, they are increasingly seen by neighboring countries as attempts to assert dominance and project power beyond India's borders. The convergence of military interests between the U.S. and India has added a new dimension to global military dynamics. Their strategic alignment is framed as a counterbalance to China, but it also creates a bipolar military tension in Asia. Countries like Pakistan, Iran, North Korea, and even Russia view this partnership with suspicion, fearing encirclement or marginalization. This leads to a dangerous arms race, where countries rapidly expand their own capabilities in response to perceived threats from the U.S. India axis. Moreover, both countries have become more willing to bypass international norms when it suits their military interests. The U.S. has launched unilateral strikes in sovereign territories, engaged in covert cyber operations, and often operates without explicit UN mandates. India, once a vocal supporter of non-intervention, has mirrored this approach with cross-border raids and preemptive strikes, sometimes without broad international support. These actions set dangerous precedents and weaken global norms around sovereignty and conflict resolution. Another layer of concern comes from the increasing integration of artificial intelligence, robotics, and cyber warfare into military doctrine. Both India and the U.S. are racing to develop autonomous weapons, cyber strike capabilities, and space-based defense systems. These technologies, while offering strategic advantages, lack clear ethical and legal frameworks, making their deployment a major concern. The fear is not only about who uses them first, but about the global chain reaction their use could trigger, creating unpredictable and potentially catastrophic consequences. In conclusion, the growing military power and strategic ambitions of India and the United States have shifted global perceptions of their role in the international system. What was once considered protective power is now being viewed as a potential threat, especially when exercised without sufficient transparency, accountability, or regard for multilateral norms. Their rise as military titans has altered the global balance of power in a way that inspires fear, not necessarily because of intent, but because of the scale, speed, and assertiveness with which that power is being deployed. The growing economic power of India and the United States has reshaped global trade, finance, and technological ecosystems in ways that have begun to unsettle other nations. Their rise is no longer just a symbol of development or prosperity, but a source of concern for countries that find themselves increasingly dependent on the systems and structures dominated by these two emerging titans. What makes their economic influence particularly troubling is the strategic way it is being wielded, using access, technology, and trade as tools of coercion or leverage to shape the policies and behaviors of others. This shift from cooperative economic engagement to strategic economic pressure is one of the key reasons why India and the U.S. are increasingly being viewed as threats in a complex and polarized global economy. The United States has historically been at the center of the global financial system, with the U.S. dollar serving as the world's primary reserve currency and American financial institutions controlling much of the global capital flow. The United States has unparalleled economic influence. This position allows the U.S. to exert pressure through sanctions, banking restrictions, and control of international financial networks such as SWIFT. While these tools were once used primarily against hostile or rogue states, their application has widened in scope, affecting even allies and trading partners that diverge from U.S. policy priorities. The increasing use of economic tools as weapons, commonly referred to as weaponized interdependence, has created a climate of caution and mistrust, especially among nations seeking to preserve their sovereignty in a world dominated by American economic institutions. At the same time, the U.S. has implemented trade policies that prioritize domestic interests and challenge the principles of free trade it once championed. Through tariffs, import restrictions, and targeted subsidies, the U.S. seeks to bring manufacturing back home and reduce dependency on foreign suppliers. While this may benefit American workers and industries in the short term, it disrupts global supply chains and creates ripple effects in economies that depend on access to the U.S. market. Many countries, particularly those in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa, have found themselves squeezed between their economic dependence on U.S. markets and the pressure to align with U.S. geopolitical interests. This has caused unease, as such dependence can translate into vulnerability, especially in times of political or economic disagreement. India, on the other hand, has emerged as a dominant economic force in the global south. With a large and youthful population, rapidly expanding infrastructure, and an increasingly skilled workforce, India is now seen as a major hub for technology, pharmaceuticals, services, and consumer markets. As India rises, it has begun to assert greater control over its trade relationships, often using its growing economic weight to dictate terms in bilateral and regional agreements. India has also adopted protectionist policies designed to promote its domestic industries and reduce foreign reliance, steps that, while boosting internal growth, have alienated trading partners who now face tougher regulations, import restrictions, and nationalistic procurement policies. A notable example of India's growing economic assertiveness is its leadership in digital public infrastructure. Through platforms like Aadhaar Biometric ID and UPI digital payments, India has created powerful tools for economic control and inclusion. These platforms are not only transforming India's own economy, but are also being exported to other developing nations under the guise of digital diplomacy. While this may appear benevolent, it creates digital dependencies that give India significant influence over the economic and social systems of other countries. Nations adopting Indian technology find themselves tied to Indian policy frameworks, potentially compromising their own digital sovereignty in exchange for convenience and development. Both India and the U.S. have also moved aggressively to dominate the technology sector. From chip manufacturing to cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and 5G infrastructure, both countries are positioning themselves as global leaders. However, access to these technologies is increasingly being restricted based on political alignment. The U.S. has banned exports of sensitive technologies to countries like China and Iran, and pressured allies to exclude certain foreign vendors. India has taken similar steps, banning dozens of Chinese apps and tightening rules for foreign investments in critical sectors. These actions, while justified as national security measures, have clear economic implications. They reshape global trade routes and redefine who gets access to the most powerful tools of the modern economy. Moreover, the economic strategies of India and the U.S. are closely linked with their foreign policy objectives. Trade deals, infrastructure investments, and technology transfers are increasingly used as instruments of geopolitical influence. Initiatives such as the U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, and India's growing role in South-South cooperation show how both nations use economic engagement as a means of strategic alignment. While these initiatives promise growth and development, they often come with implicit expectations, political loyalty, alignment with strategic goals, and compliance with broader ideological visions of economic governance. The result of all these strategies is a growing fear among other nations that economic interdependence with India and the U.S. is no longer a mutual benefit, but a potential trap. Smaller economies, unable to compete or diversify quickly, may find themselves locked into relationships where their policy decisions are constrained by the economic power wielded by these two giants. Global trade becomes less about efficiency or opportunity and more about politics and control. This perception of coercion, economic threats disguised as development partnerships, erodes trust and fuels the view that India and the U.S., rather than fostering a fair and open global economy, are leveraging their power for dominance. In conclusion, the shift from cooperative economic leadership to strategic economic control by India and the United States has contributed to their growing image as global threats. Their ability to dictate trade terms, manipulate access to technology, and use financial systems as tools of influence has created a world where smaller nations must navigate with caution. While economic strength itself is not inherently dangerous, the way it is being used to assert control, extract concessions, and enforce compliance is transforming the global economic order into one that feels increasingly coercive and unbalanced. The rise of nationalist ideologies in both India and the United States has significantly altered their domestic and foreign policies, giving rise to a more confrontational and self-interested posture on the global stage. Once hailed as the world's leading democracies, these two nations have increasingly turned inward, promoting political agendas rooted in cultural identity, historical grievance, and national pride. These shifts have resulted in protectionist economic measures, hardened foreign policies, and a growing resistance to multilateral engagement. The result is a breakdown in global cooperation, rising ideological polarization, and the transformation of India and the United States into powers that inspire concern rather than confidence among other nations. In the United States, nationalism has evolved from fringe rhetoric into a central tenet of mainstream politics. Fueled by growing political polarization, cultural anxieties, and economic dislocation, the narrative of America First has taken deep root in public discourse. Leaders have emphasized border control, manufacturing revival, and protection of American jobs at the expense of long-standing international commitments. Immigration policies have become stricter, skepticism toward international institutions has grown, and foreign aid and global alliances are now routinely questioned or renegotiated based on short-term national interest. While these policies enjoy significant support domestically, they send a message abroad that the U.S. is no longer willing to shoulder global responsibilities unless there is a direct and measurable return. This retreat from multilateralism has created a vacuum in global leadership. International institutions once underpinned by American diplomacy, such as the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, and various UN initiatives, have been weakened by budget cuts, withdrawals, or lack of support. Other nations, seeing the U.S. less willing to lead or compromise, have either moved to fill the gap themselves or drifted toward alternative alliances. The decline in American diplomatic engagement has also emboldened rivals who see an opportunity to expand their influence in regions once firmly aligned with U.S. policy. India, similarly, has undergone a political transformation marked by a strong sense of cultural nationalism. The idea of a Hindu majority identity as the foundation of Indian unity has gained prominence in both policy and rhetoric. While the Indian constitution remains secular, recent years have witnessed an increasing alignment between religious identity and political power. National symbols, historical narratives, and policy decisions are now often framed in terms of restoring pride and strength to an ancient civilization that was, according to this view, weakened by centuries of foreign rule. This cultural nationalism has not only redefined India's domestic landscape, but has also influenced its relations with neighboring countries and minority groups. Under this ideological shift, India's policies toward neighboring states have become more assertive. Border tensions with China have escalated, ties with Pakistan have become more hostile, and even relations with smaller countries like Nepal and Sri Lanka have been marked by patronizing diplomacy or strategic pressure. At the same time, there is a growing intolerance for international criticism, especially regarding issues like religious freedom, press liberty, or human rights. Any such critique is often labeled as interference in sovereign affairs, and critics are dismissed as biased or anti-national. This defensive posture has strained India's relationships with Western democracies and human rights organizations that once considered it a stable partner. Both India and the United States have embraced protectionism as an extension of their nationalist ideologies. The emphasis on self-reliance, Make in India, and Buy American has led to higher tariffs, stricter foreign investment rules, and growing suspicion of foreign influence in strategic sectors. While such measures aim to stimulate domestic industry and protect jobs, they also disrupt international trade, reduce foreign investor confidence, and create economic inefficiencies. Moreover, these policies have often been coupled with rhetoric that casts globalization as a threat rather than a benefit, further deepening ideological divides with more open economies. Nationalist politics in both countries have also impacted internal social cohesion. In the United States, debates over race, immigration, and national identity have become more divisive, with certain political factions actively stoking fear of the other to gain support. In India, religious minorities, particularly Muslims, have faced growing marginalization through laws, citizenship policies, and social exclusion. This internal polarization weakens the democratic fabric and fuels tensions that can spill into regional or even global conflicts. When countries turn against their own diversity, they send a message to the world that pluralism is no longer valued, a worrying sign for other nations that once looked to India and the U.S. as inclusive democracies. The global consequences of these nationalist ideologies are significant. International cooperation on climate change, pandemic response, cybersecurity, and disarmament requires trust, dialogue, and shared goals. When powerful nations prioritize national pride over global good, progress stalls and rivalries deepen. Smaller countries are forced to choose sides in an increasingly divided world, and the space for neutral diplomacy shrinks. Alliances become more fragile, trade becomes more politicized, and the overall risk of conflict rises. What makes this situation particularly concerning is that these nationalist ideologies are not temporary political trends. They are being institutionalized. School curricula, media narratives, and even legal frameworks are being reshaped to reflect these nationalist worldviews. This suggests that the shift may endure for years or even decades, making it harder to return to more inclusive and cooperative forms of governance. In conclusion, the rise of nationalism in India and the United States represents a major transformation in how these countries interact with the world and with their own people. While nationalism can serve to strengthen identity and mobilize development, it becomes dangerous when it leads to exclusion, aggression, and isolation. As these two powerful nations pursue paths defined by self-interest, cultural pride, and economic protectionism, they risk undermining the very values that once made them admired across the globe. What remains is a world increasingly shaped by division, mistrust, and the fear that cooperation is giving way to confrontation. The growing technological dominance of India and the United States has become a defining feature of their global influence and increasingly a source of international concern. While both countries are celebrated for their innovation and contributions to the digital age, their drive to control key areas of emerging technology, particularly artificial intelligence (AI), cyber capabilities, surveillance infrastructure, and digital governance, has prompted fears about long-term implications for privacy, freedom, and global digital balance. As they race to outpace competitors and consolidate control over critical digital systems, these technological superpowers are reshaping not only the economy and military strategies, but also the fabric of political and civil life across the globe. The United States has long held a dominant position in global technology. It is home to the world's most powerful tech companies, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and to Silicon Valley, the epicenter of digital innovation. Through these corporations, the U.S. has built a digital empire that touches nearly every corner of the planet. American platforms host the world's communications, store vast amounts of personal and corporate data, and drive the development of algorithms that shape public discourse and behavior. This dominance enables the United States to set the standards for the digital economy and to exert considerable influence over global information flows. However, this influence is not always benign. The increasing integration between U.S. tech giants and the American government has led to a convergence of corporate and state power in the digital realm. Surveillance programs revealed over the last decade have shown how intelligence agencies like the NSA can access massive data troves collected by private companies. Moreover, through mechanisms like the Cloud Act and data sharing agreements, the U.S. can compel tech companies to hand over information, even when it pertains to users in other countries. This has raised alarms about data sovereignty and the lack of global safeguards against intrusive surveillance. India, although newer to this realm, is quickly asserting itself as a technological force in the developing world. Its advances in digital infrastructure, particularly through state-led initiatives such as Aadhaar, a biometric identity system, and UPI Unified Payments Interface, have revolutionized access to public services and digital finance. These platforms have dramatically expanded inclusion and efficiency within India, but they also centralize enormous amounts of personal data, creating concerns about how that data is stored, accessed, and used. The state's strong control over these platforms has led to fears of surveillance and potential misuse, especially in the absence of comprehensive privacy laws or strong institutional checks. India's digital transformation is not confined within its borders. Through digital diplomacy, It is now exporting its technological frameworks to developing countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. While this can help other nations leapfrog into the digital era, it also creates a form of dependency. Countries that adopt Indian digital tools may find themselves tethered to India's data standards, payment networks, and technological governance. In doing so, India extends its influence into the political and economic spheres of those countries, potentially using that leverage to advance strategic goals. Both India and the United States are also racing to dominate artificial intelligence, a technology that has profound implications for economic competitiveness, national security, and societal control. AI is being integrated into everything from military systems to healthcare, policing, and finance. While AI can improve efficiency and decision making, it also introduces risks of bias, manipulation, and loss of human oversight. The absence of universal regulations governing the ethical use of AI has allowed dominant countries to proceed unchecked, shaping global norms according to their interests rather than broader international consensus. Cybersecurity is another domain where the two nations are expanding their reach. The U.S. has invested heavily in both defensive and offensive cyber capabilities, establishing dedicated cyber commands and deploying cyber operations globally. India, too, has significantly enhanced its cyber defense systems and is developing capabilities that could be used for strategic offensive purposes. However, as both countries bolster their cyber arsenals, they also create a more unstable and unpredictable digital landscape. Cyber attacks are difficult to trace, easy to deny, and capable of causing significant disruption to civilian life and infrastructure. The growing normalization of state-sponsored cyber activities further blurs the line between peace and conflict, making the digital realm a constant battleground. One of the most troubling developments is the expansion of surveillance infrastructure. In both countries, mass surveillance has become normalized under the pretext of national security, law enforcement, and administrative efficiency. In the U.S., extensive government surveillance capabilities, often in collaboration with private companies, continue to raise serious concerns about the right to privacy and civil liberties. In India, the government has rolled out facial recognition technology in public spaces, monitored social media activity, and reportedly used spyware against activists and journalists. These practices, often shrouded in secrecy and with limited judicial oversight, are increasingly seen as tools for political control. The influence of these two nations on global digital policy is immense. They actively shape debates on internet governance, digital taxation, cross-border data flows, and platform regulation. However, they often do so with an eye on preserving their own dominance rather than ensuring equitable or open digital access. This has led to rising concerns that the global digital order is being engineered in ways that benefit the powerful, entrench inequality, and marginalize less developed nations or vulnerable communities. In conclusion, while India and the United States have brought immense innovation and connectivity to the world, their pursuit of technological dominance also carries significant risks. Their growing control over the digital space, combined with inadequate oversight, increasing surveillance, and competitive posture, threatens the openness, fairness, and safety of the global digital commons. Without clear international frameworks, ethical standards, and democratic accountability, the technological rise of these two nations may end up creating more fear than freedom and more control than progress.